We've been fighting a long time, and we have all lost so very much, so many loved ones gone. But you are not alone. There are pockets of resistance all around the planet. We are at the brink. You have no idea how important you are. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
Ave Maria Stella, Dei Mater Alma, atque semper Virgo, Felix te porta.
Welcome, everybody. Steve with Sense of Fidelity. I'm coming at you with what would be, we'll just get into that later. Somebody who knew somebody that you've heard of with the devotion. I'm trying to explain it in a weird way. But anyway, the author of the book, Unveiling the Sixth Station of the Cross, Miss Mary Jane Zuzolo. Did I say that right?
Zuzolo. Very close.
Zuzolo. I had it right in the car. Anyway, Mary, we've been talking about this, trying to do this for, I don't know, going on almost a year, 2 years now, 3. I lost count, carried the 2. So finally we were able to get together and do this. Long story on why this was delayed for a couple weeks, months. But anyway, thank you for coming on and appreciate you being with us.
Oh, I really appreciate the invitation. Thank you. So
tell us, as we say in the South, who is you? Who are you're from the actual, you're a relative of the actual person who gave us the devotion to the Holy Face.
Yes, I am a great niece of Sister Marie de Saint Pierre, and I would just always call her Sister Saint Pierre. That's what her family called her, and that's what her sisters in Carmel called her. But anyway, her eldest brother immigrated to America at about the same time she entered Carmel, and he was my great grandfather, and so that's the connection. And it turns out only one, even though he eldest, the only one to live to see the devotion approved by Leo the 13th for the whole world immediately in 1885. So he had that joy in his life to be able to see that, and so that's kind of neat. And later, if we have time, I have a couple little mementos of Sister Saint Pierre that were handed down, and I can show those to you. And yeah, they were in the grandfather things when he passed away, and so we did grow up knowing about Sister Saint Pierre and the devotion, but that was during the 70s, and devotions were really de-emphasized. And in fact, my mother was really discouraged from wanting to investigate the devotion to a great extent by even priests and nuns at that time. And so we really weren't aware of many writings on the devotion. Then when my grandfather passed away, he had all these French books on the devotion, but they were in French, and we didn't speak French. And so they were sort of inaccessible. But you have reprinted a version of this, Life of Sister Saint Pierre. This is like the same book almost as what you have, the one of Life of Sister Mary of St. Peter, Carmel of Tours. And this was inscribed to my great grandfather by the Carmelites of New Orleans, because they translated this version into English, or French version into English, which I do have the original French version too, just here. And that one's in paperback. So they're both very fragile. And my mom naturally didn't want me to take those away. She kind of guarded those. And so it was a while, this was before the internet, before my husband actually was the one to find, a reprinted version at that time. Not nearly so nice as yours, but I use that as my primary resource in the writing, because it really goes into the full extent of her mystical experiences after she entered Carmel. And also gives the full context of her revelations. And while I love the golden arrow, just for the sake of brevity, it doesn't go into all of that. And I feel like so much now is better understood in hindsight with the benefit of this original writing. And also, the example of Saint Therese, who had such a great devotion to the Holy Face, and even successive apparitions and devotions. We now have the other devotion to the Holy Face of Blessed Perina, and we have like the Divine Mercy devotion and so forth. And we can really kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together better in hindsight, I think. And so this was part of why I wanted to write the book. And so I just felt called to address some of these things that maybe haven't been spoken about as much, and kind of delve into a deep analysis of the book, or of the devotion, I should say.
Yeah, because I think when we talked, the first time we talked, you did the forward or the introduction to Father Carney's book on the Secret of the Holy Face, and it was probably the greatest forward or intro ever written. It was, by the time you get done reading it, you're ready to take the hill, sort of say. You did a great job with that. So I had to go, I got to talk to this lady. This is amazing. I reached out to you, said you were bringing up this one book, and you wanted to do an angle on Holy Job and the Holy Face and Holy Job. So I guess explain how, because that's definitely an angle we haven't talked about with Father Carney or anybody else, and I'm sure no one's brought that up in any other videos or shows or books, actually. So how did you go with that angle?
Okay, maybe first I can, just real briefly, I know a lot of people already know about the Holy Face, so I'll try to, mention only briefly things people would know, but kind of delve deeper into other things. And, to kind of get to Job, maybe I'll just mention how and why the devotion was given in the first place, or when and how and why, because really Job kind of brings that to a new angle. So Sister St. Pierre was a young French Carmelite nun, and she began to receive these revelations, private approved revelations from Christ. It was somewhat after, of course, the first French Revolution, but it was leading into the second. And it was kind of a timely request by Christ. He wanted her to initiate the devotion to make reparation for sins of blasphemy. And it was timely because, this followed the free-thinking notions surrounding the revolution, just left an aftermath of atheistic and blasphemous ideology, which, now pretty much normal, unfortunately. And so, this is kind of this free thinking, the motto of the revolution. It was originally Masonic, liberty, equality, and fraternity. And so, kind of that free thinking had ties with Freemasonry, and also with the leaders of communism, Lenin, Marx, Engels, and Trotsky. They were all Freemasons, which, that ties in with communism, because that's what they were propagating. And so, in terms of the kind of the philosophy of this thinking, that went back to the rationalism of the Enlightenment, where man was deciding that he could be the arbiter of truth in terms of his reason and argumentation. He didn't need the immutable truth of God as preserved in, the natural law, the 10 Commandments, the doctrine of the faith. And this opened the door for modernism, in which man was deciding, well, truth is in flux. It can change, and it can even be based according to my own emotions. And then that opened the door to moral relativism, which maybe we're all a little more familiar with, in which, people say, oh, well, there's no one, there's there's your truth and my truth, and they're all okay, except for, of course, if your truth happens to be recognizing moral law as preserved in the doctrine of the faith. And so that's where, Benedict the 16th came up with the term, the dictatorship of relativism. And then finally, now we have wokeism, which in many ways is just a turning on the head of the truth and morality as preserved in the doctrine of the faith. And so, these things are a great offense to God. And he's designed for us a means of reparation, a spirituality that's designed for the current era, because these are new offenses. And, he wants to bring back men to proper love and reverence of him. And, I think, Father Carney's book, even I believe, has the phrase that, it is the devotion destined to save society. And that's from, and it does this, it heals the ills of our time. Through this reparation, it's the greatest devotion to make reparation for the greatest crimes. And I know that sounds sort of shocking, but these are things that Christ revealed in the Revelations. And the reason it's the greatest is because it concerns the adoration of and reparation to the Godhead itself, the Trinity. And in fact, I guess I should say, versus the miraculous, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, versus the common wine of the other devotions. I'm sorry, I meant to say, Christ compares it to the miraculous wine served at the wedding feast of Cana, versus the common wine of the other devotions, which are centered around the humanity of Christ. And, this is not a put down in any way. It's just describing a difference, and they all are very integral to one another. And in fact, this devotion was found, so to speak, in the Sacred Heart, and its complement. And so it's just explaining a difference. And Christ went on to say that it's the most beautiful work under the sun. And I think that statement makes people uncomfortable, because they're thinking, well, wait a minute, the redemption, and the redemption as renewed in the most holy sacrament of the altar, is the greatest or the most beautiful work under the sun. And certainly it is. This work is not meant to somehow trump that. It's meant to be an extension of that. And the reason is because we are not using our own merits and love offered to Christ in this devotion. We're using the merits and love of Christ. And in this way, it sort of mirrors the consecration in Mass, in which, of course, Christ presents himself as a perfect offering to the Father. And it, Christ reveals in the Revelations that this is very integral to the Holy Sacrament of the altar. Christ tells us that his face is there veiled, and he wants to reveal it to the devout as more dazzling than the sun in the sacrament of the altar. And the devotion is actually designed to be made in union with the Sacred Heart of the sacrament of the altar. And that's made clear even in the Golden Arrow prayer, which many of your viewers might be aware of. Let's see, that last phrase, may the name be glorified and honored. And it lists these other places and people, but also in the most holy sacrament of the altar. And so it's, the reason, I said it's the greatest devotion to make reparation for the greatest crimes. Well, these greatest evils are, it's like just as the reason it's the preeminent devotion is because it's centered on Godhead. That is also the case for the crimes for which it's supposed to make reparation. They are centered on the rights of God as outlined in the first three commandments. And so these are unparalleled sins. The first three commandments will always be the first three. They're sort of the axis of moral law. The other seven hinge on them. And so when people commit these acts of blasphemy by, irreverence, blasphemy, and the profanation of Sunday. Those are sins aimed against the divinity whom they cannot reach. And so they fall back, so to speak, on the face of Christ. And Christ tells us sort of shockingly that they renew the injuries to his face. And that's where the comparison to Veronica comes in. You know, the first part of the title, Unveiling the Sixth Station of the Cross. We're supposed to imitate Veronica. You know, she is commemorated in the sixth station for her act of bravery and consolation in wanting to, soothe the face of Christ for just a moment by offering her veil that he could wipe it. And in recompense, he left his exact likeness on her veil. And similarly, when we make these acts of reparation, which are acts of consolation to Christ, he imprints on our souls his exact likeness. And this exchange refers to as the greatest source of grace, second to the sacraments. So it really combines the power of God with the cooperation of man, and uses that as spiritual armament to assist Our Lady in defeating Satan. So let me get to the Job, if that makes sense to you. I'll now I've introduced.
Good, yeah. Just leading up, and all you good Catholics at home better know the first three commandments. If not, if you know the problems of the church a lot more than the commandments, stop all your YouTube videos of watching and learn those 10 before you continue watching anybody talk about the problems of the church. Anyway, I digress. But yeah, the Veronica stuff is so great. I mean, I remember hearing a priest, is a sermon from 5 years ago that he did, and I'd heard it last year. And it gave me chills when I found out that there's a tradition saying that she was the woman cured from touching our Lord's helm. And I'm going, why have I never heard this? Apparently, the Eastern churches teach that a lot, and Eusebius writes that in his historical books. But I've never in my life ever heard. You talk about a sermon that would get people fired up in a good way in their hearts. I think personally, I would think that would just increase the piety beyond belief. Thinking, holy cow, because you go, whatever happened to her? She had to have done something. It's not like she just, got healed and went, you know what? I'm going to Cancun for the weekend. I'm good. I'm done. We're never coming back. What happened? And to connect her to the coming back through, just like in the thing, she went through a crowd to get to him. She had to go through a crowd in Calvary to get to him. She did it all again, except back to him, touch the helm to touch material to his head this time. And I think it's one of the coolest things to think of that we just don't know about. It gets exciting. I'm trying not to get overly nutty on her.
No, and I remember reading something that you did, or maybe it was something that you did that you were pointing this out, and I just thought that was such a fun connection. And yes, that just makes her all the more endearing, I guess, to us. It's just a great story. It just keeps getting greater and greater. Yeah. But yeah. So okay. So the thing about Job, I guess I'll just I'll start talking, be able to see some of the parallels, and then even his life events kind of they point back to essential fundamentals of the devotion. So it's really kind of surprising. So I was talking about the Holy Face devotion. It is essentially an offering to God, because the merits and love encased or in residing in the face of Christ, that's what's being offered to the Father. It's not our own merits and love. And again, this mirrors consecration at Mass. And so in this fact, we are like both Job and his friends. And just so everybody's kind of on the same page with Job, I'll give a real brief, overview. Job was, of course, a figure in the Old Testament, and he was a contemporary of the great patriarchs. He was not an Israelite, but he did worship the one true God, and he was very pious. He also happened to be very prosperous. And so this catches the attention of Satan, and he challenges God and says, well, if Job was stripped of all these copious blessings, he would curse you to his face. In other words, the only reason he's so pious is because he's prosperous.
He's got everything.
Yeah, right.
Of course she loves you. He's got everything.
Yeah. So it's kind of a surprise, but God grants this challenge. And so he permits Job's great deprivation, and Job loses his wealth, his children, his own health to leprosy. He's continually subjected to the wrongful accusation of his friends because they believe his turn in fortune must be a consequence of his sin. And then he even undergoes the temptation of his wife to curse God and die. And yet through all this, not only does he refrain from blaspheming God, but he does not doubt God's existence or deny God in any way. Yet, given Job's incomparable calamity, as I say, the friends, they want to reconcile their understanding of a just God by insisting that Job must be guilty. And so there's this very long debate, and Job is trying to defend his innocence while also attesting to God's justice. And then God eventually appears in like a storm cloud, and he explains that because man cannot comprehend the greatness and wisdom of the Creator, when in affliction, man should bend humbly and trustingly under the hand of the Almighty. And then he warns Job, you need to be careful that in attempting to justify yourself, you do not condemn, so to speak, your Creator. And then Job does realize, I have been complaining a lot and maybe not speaking enough of God's goodness and justice. Even though he never did blaspheme or doubt God's existence, he still complained. And so he makes atonement for this and submits in humility. And God is very pleased with Job for this. But he's still angered toward the friends who have not done this. And they have not, according to him, spoken the things that are right before God. And therefore, God requests that Job offer his own face in making reparation for his friends. So the friends they're kind of not worthy in a way to offer their own faces. And so I think you can begin to see one of the big parallels that, like the friends, we must make reparation for current sins of blasphemy. But our faces are really not sufficient given the gravity of the offense. Christ says iniquity has never reached such a degree. We need to rely on a face that is more mercy invoking, more pleasing to God, just as Job's face was more pleasing than his friends. And so, having said that, we are also like Job in that we are making reparation on behalf of our brethren, only using Christ's face, not our own. And yet still we must initiate the process. And so, the whole point of this devotion is the appeasement of God's justice to draw mercy from man. And, Christ does promise the conversion of the multitudes through this devotion. And, he's chosen this as a means of reparation for these times, using, the combined power of God and the cooperation of man. He describes this great iniquity as deep-rooted impiety and absolute incredulity. And so, in other words, man is either doubting or probably more accurately rejecting God's truth and morality to the point of making his own or inventing his own. And this is actually like Job and his friends as well. The friends think they are trying to defend God, but they're actually offending him by contorting the truth. And they're doing that by ignoring the truth of Job's innocence, because they want so desperately to fit this narrative that the guilt or innocence of a person necessarily correlates with one's life circumstances. And so from this, we're to learn that one is not free to create his own truth. And of course, this starts to sound familiar with today's sins, like the wokeism, more relativism, and so forth. Similarly, one's not decide his own morality. Job, he did initially scrutinize God in his attempts to defend, and we learned that man is not free to justify himself at the price of questioning God. God is the highest standard of justice. We don't get, so to speak, to decide what is right behavior of God, nor of himself, of ourselves, I should say. And finally, another lesson is that reparation must be made for these offenses. These are grave offenses against the majesty of God. We're in our day trying to create our own truth and morality. And these have been sort of committed in an unparalleled way through modernism. Pius X refers to that as the synthesis of all heresies, and communism. And I talked about the relationship between rationalism, modernism, moral relativism, and wokeism. And these ideologies, they're kind of a packaged deal, and they're referred to as the errors of Russia by Our Lady of Fatima. And certainly communism is a part of that. And communism was singled out by name in the revelations given to Sister St. Pierre as the enemy of God and his church. And most of us understand that communism, it borrows tactics of infiltration from within to destroy the faith, along with modernism and Freemasonry and so forth. Again, kind of a package deal, the errors of Russia, plural. Communism is also overtly anti-God. It's not just ungodly because of sin and weakness, like maybe, we certainly can think of our capitalistic society as being very ungodly. And yet, at least it was not designed to be that way. Communism is designed upon atheistic principles from the get-go. It destroys the image of God and man by taking away individual rights and freedoms, and destroy their family and so forth. And Marx and Lenin, they were unabashed by this. Marx famously said that communism begins with the outset with atheism, and Lenin said something similar, like communism abolishes all eternal truths, religion, and morality. And so I think in many ways we are being allowed to experience the natural consequences of our collective embracing of these ideologies. In Psalm 81, I just struck just the other day, it says, "So I let them go according to the desires of their heart." They're talking about the Israelites, and they shall walk in their own inventions. And this is something that Father Carney, kind of touched on in his book. And to bring that forward a little bit more, I don't think I explained that the Holy Face devotion represents, the Holy Face represents three things. It does represent kind of a recording of the redemptive suffering of our Lord. We can see, of course, his injuries to his face. It is also, as I did mention, the divine seal. It's the emblem of the Godhead, the Trinity itself. And then the third thing is it represents the face of the church or its doctrine. And I think the crisis in the church that we are experiencing, that is literally then, it's a defacing of the doctrine, a defacing of the face of Christ, making it unrecognizable, and maybe an eclipse of its former self in many respects, as in Our Lady of La Salette. But I think I have talked before that we like solutions. We can all identify the problems, but we want a solution. And that remedy is reparation. And, as I mentioned in the Old Testament, through and weakness, the Israelites did fall often into blasphemy and so forth. But they knew that to turn God's face back toward them, so to speak, they needed to offer reparation, and this would allow them to enjoy blessings once again, enjoy the religion once again. Again, as Father Carney mentioned. So the Holy Face devotion is the modern day reparation, established again to align us to proper fear of the Lord, bringing man back to a respect for God's authority and his truth and morality as outlined in the 10 Commandments and recognized in natural law, and allowing us, we expect then to enjoy God's blessings once again. And, I'll hopefully have time later to talk about, it's really a spirituality designed by God himself for the modern era, to restore life and light to the masses and to convert the multitudes even. This is promised. And yet, these selfless acts on the devotee's part, as sort of co-redemption in Christ, these aid in our own salvation as well. So like Job, God chooses to give us a role in the salvation of our brethren. It's not that he would have to do it this way, but he chooses. And so I can go on and talk more about the kind of the individual analogies found within Job's life, if you like.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, I was just thinking, the Holy Face, in a sense, is kind of almost in every book of the Old Testament, and you hear in the Psalms, obviously, and Moses having to hide his face away if he couldn't see God's countenance, and the Nativity. You see all the photos, the paintings we have, especially in the West, is usually you see a baby, his arms are up like that, but really, you bounded up. You see that in Eastern icons. The only thing showing is the baby face. His face is the only thing showing. And that was what St. Joseph's looking down at, the Holy Face, and things like that. It's just when you hear it, you see it. It's been around since the beginning, in a sense. It's just, and then when you bring that up, I mean, I want to make war with the communists. One of the greatest threats in the church comes up through here, and Holy Job being blessed be God, blessed be the Lord give, the Lord take away, blessed be the name of the Lord. Even though he's fighting him, but then goes, where were you at creation? That's always a great, that's a great line. God, I'm just going to sit over here now and be quiet. And you do your thing.
That's right. No, I agree. And I think later, if we get time, we'll talk a little bit about Sister St. Pierre's mystical experiences at the end of her life. And she really, through those experiences was able to tap into with the correlation between Christ's, the humble face of the Christ child, and then the humility that Christ endured in his passion. And, they are kind of two sides of the same coin, of course. And so, yeah, that's a neat connection. So kind of in Job's life, I guess this is what, really surprised me as I was into this, is like the initial parallel. I thought, oh, that's really neat. But then I thought, oh, there's more, just kind of when you unpack it a little bit, beginning with Satan even wishing to tempt Job to blaspheme. It's like, of all the horrific crimes Satan could hope to induce Job to commit, he chose blasphemy, which is, of course, Satan's signature sin. And, it's opposite of fear of the Lord. And, Satan knows what we forget. He knows what an abomination this sin is. And, and Christ tells Sister St. Pierre that we can't really comprehend the magnitude of this sin. And, that is magnitude of offenses against the first 3 commandments, whether we're taking the Lord's name in vain, not going to Mass on Sunday, or certainly if we hold something else as God, or deny God its existence altogether. And then, kind of more comprehensive or collective sins, like I was saying, of communism and modernism and so forth. Okay, and another example is just Satan using Job's wife to tempt God to curse God. I'm sorry, tempt Job to curse God and die. We are told in the Revelations that this is the deadliest sin. It leads to the death of the soul, and by blasphemy, sinners they outrage God to his face, and they attack him openly, and in a sense pronounce their own judgment upon themselves. And then also, I think in this temptation that the wife presents is kind of, that can kind of represent our culture and the collective sin of blasphemy. It just kind of it feeds on itself, and induces more and more people to feel like it's normal, and so I think sadly, blasphemy for the most part is not even recognized as wrong, certainly in the norms of society, often not even by Christians, nor even by some church leaders. And, this kind of really makes it categorically different, from times past. There was always examples of baddies even within the church, but there seemed to be enough of a collective ability to recognize these sins as wrong and to kind of correct them, and we don't see that as much now. And as I was saying, like this willful inversion of God's truth and morality now being so accepted. And, okay, another parallel, just even the fact that Satan was allowed to tempt Job. I think we have an amazing parallel with that in Leo the 13th's, Pope Leo the 13th's vision. And, many may be familiar with that, in which, he witnessed Satan challenging Christ that he could destroy the church if given approximately 100 years and more power over those under him. And so, this happened, and Leo the 13th was so convinced by it that he more or less immediately composed the St. Michael prayer. He, within 2 months, had approved the first confraternity of the Holy Face in its current version. And then within a year, or right about a year, he had approved the Archconfraternity of the Holy Face for the whole world. And so, I might mention more about that later too, but so that's another interesting parallel. And then Job's leprosy. Christ tells us that blasphemy pierces his sacred heart and covers it with sores like, quote, like another Lazarus. And then this is when he points out to Sister St. Pierre that there are compassionate dogs who consoled poor Lazarus, and he invites her and all of us to render him a similar service by way of the Golden Arrow prayer. And he says that not only wounds his heart with delight and love, so, really does console those wounds, heal those wounds, but he also releases torrents of graces for the conversion of sinners when that's said with devotion. And another parallel, Job's resistance to the temptation and his great humility. Like I mentioned, Job did humble himself for speaking the things which he says were spoken inconsiderately. And then he is asked to intercede for his friends. And in the devotion, Christ tells Sister St. Pierre that in favor of souls who do make these acts of reparation for blasphemy against God, God's justice will be appeased, and he will give great grace to the guilty. And, this is part of his promises. Another, God does accept Job's face in place of his friends. And, the Douay-Rheims translation is really striking. It uses the word face. And that's what first, kind of alerted me. And that's also what Venerable DuPont noticed. He did, have a statement about this in his book about the face of Job being offered. And he also observed that God promised it to Job that he would hear his prayers. And he promised this, in a sense, to no one else in the books of the Bible. And then also he, DuPont, that is, made the observation that man doesn't lose time when he prays for his friends. And it was when he was praying for his friends that Job was delivered. And, then Job receives twice all his previous possessions for having interceded. And this can be analogous to the really unparalleled promises offered in connection with the devotion, as well as the unparalleled miracles associated with it. And probably many are familiar with Venerable DuPont, who was referred to by Pius IX as perhaps the greatest miracle worker in church history, because there were 6,000 documented miracles that he performed, and many more that were undocumented, many more by him sending vials of oil through the mail. It was such a well-known occurrence that people from all over the world would just address their envelopes to Holy Man of Tours, France, and it would arrive to him. These miracles, they were centered around the Veronica veil image in the Vatican. And, I won't go into too much detail because I know other people have, but this is the image. And it's, the Veronica veil had undergone a miracle of the Vatican, so to speak, in which it became miraculously enlivened when the Saint Pope Pius IX had to flee to Gaeta for safety during the Second French Revolution. Anyway, DuPont used one of these images, which is a drawing of that miracle that was then touched to the original veil in the Vatican, the Lance of Longinus, and the true relic of the cross. And copies were given out. This was before the time of the photograph, so there were, more like engravings that had been made and given out. And Leo DuPont received one of these, and the first miracle kind of happened by chance, and then it kept happening, and then for 30 years they happened. So it was just amazing.
Dom Garanger got anointed with the holy oil from DuPont's house.
Oh, wait, say that again.
Dom Prosper Garanger.
He did. He was healed.
DuPont, well, he wasn't healed. He was anointed for his death with it, because him and DuPont was everywhere. Anybody who's who in the Catholic world, DuPont was friends with, and he would go sit at in his book, sit at the feet of Dom Garanger. And when he died, Garanger had the holy oil from DuPont's house anointed on him.
Wow. That's amazing. I did not know that. I'll have to remember that. I knew that he had met the Curé d'Ars, and I think the Curé had said, "Oh well, I so look forward to us meeting in heaven." And so I think that's kind of amazing. And he was able to find DuPont without any prior knowledge of him. DuPont was just in a crowd, and he was giving a sermon, and he was able to single him out and came up and told him that. So there must be a lot of neat stories like that. That's really fun.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, the crucified to the devotion. He couldn't leave his house for 30 years, and it's just, the connections just from Sister Mary to Leo to, we'll get into Therese. I mean, it's just all it's extraordinary wealth that isn't well known.
It is. That's and I think in many ways DuPont is like a modern day Job. He gave everything to promote the devotion, and he was sort of a champion of defense of God's majesty and honor, by promoting this devotion. And he was just an amazing person. He had been so wealthy, but by the end of his life, he basically gave it all away in his various philanthropic endeavors, and then certainly through the Holy Face devotion, and he lost
losing his family.
Yeah, that's right. So that's another neat connection. So anyway, I guess kind of just to finish up this part, maybe before we do go on to Therese, because it's such a neat connection. It's I think we can begin to sense that this devotion is more than, just a most powerful set of prayers, which it is. The prayers, the Golden Arrow was dictated to Sister St. Pierre by Christ, and she was inspired to compose the Holy Face Chaplet and so forth. It is a spirituality designed to call men back to proper reverence and love, and to really help the devotee himself in his own spiritual journey. So, in fact, just mentioning the chaplet, this is now I think I'll send you a better picture so you can put that up. But this is an original chaplet that was given to my great grandfather, and I hope you can see. I probably can't. No, we'll send a picture, but there you can kind of see it's the veil of Veronica that's on there. It's not the Shroud of Turin. And there, there are differences in that devotion, and that's something I do go into in the book. Again, they're both beautiful, both needed, but there are differences. And this is the Seven Sorrows of Mary on the other side. And the first part is kind of like a rosary, the way it's configured, and then of course you have the 6 beads divided. And I think a lot of people might be familiar, but the main verse that's repeated so often in this chaplet is the one that Saint Athanasius had identified as most feared by the demons, and I think he may have picked this up from Saint Anthony of the Desert as well, or maybe that's where it originated. But anyway, arise, O Lord, let thy enemies be scattered. Let all that hate thee flee from before thy face. And so, as Father Carney says, it's sort of like a minor exorcism in the protection of Holy Mother Church and the defeat of her enemies, meaning the conversion, not the death. So, I
think it was Leo X had the bull against Luther, Exsurge Domine. So.
Yeah, that's right. So, I can get into Saint Therese if you like, then.
Yeah, I mean that's because everyone knows Therese.
Yeah,
is Saint Therese of the Child of Jesus, and they never put the second. I mean, again, until I really got into this, I never heard of it. And then she wanted that name. She added that name, and some reason we didn't want enough characters in the prayer cards or whatever. They eliminate that, even though she's holding photos of the Child Jesus and the Holy Face. And it was, I think it was close to her death when that one famous photo was taken. But yeah, she was big into this.
She was, and that is something that has really been overlooked in the last 50 years or so.
Her whole family was big.
Maybe 70, I guess. Yeah, it's really virtually not spoken about whatsoever. And I think Saint Therese, she provides a real service to the devotion, because I do think, as I was mentioning, in hindsight, we can understand the spirituality of the devotion so much better for looking back to her and witnessing her devotion. But also, I think that the devotion does a service in our time to Saint Therese, to maybe put back the context that was there that has been overlooked for these 70 years or so, which, by the way, those are the same 70 years when the devotion just sort of seemed to drop off in obscurity. It had been enormously popular for the first 70 years, probably in large part because of the miracles and the Archconfraternity being approved and so forth. And then, for so long, I know all my youth growing up, I thought, well, no one's ever even heard of this devotion. I can't talk about it. I mean, no one knows what I'm talking about if I do. And thankfully, I would say in the last, 3 to 5 years, it's just sort of exploded on the internet, maybe especially the last 2 or 3 years. And I think a big part of that is people are realizing the relevance of the devotion in terms of the fact that, communism is to be defeated by the use of this devotion as spiritual armament. It's a sister devotion, therefore, to Fatima, but of course it came before Fatima, and there are differences to the two. But anyway, now there's been more books written on it and wonderful websites, that give a lot of information about the devotion. But one thing, people, I do think, thankfully, are kind of recognizing some of the basics about Saint Therese, but to go in deeper, that was just that's kind of something that, is fun to investigate. Both Sister St. Pierre and St. Therese, they held the wounded Holy Face, yes, at the center of their own spiritual lives, but they also utilized it in the salvation of their brethren. I think that they, of course, could recognize that love is sacrifice. And again, that love, that sacrifice is sort of recorded on the wounded Holy Face of Christ, who has taken on our sins for the conversion of the world. And so they wanted to imitate this act of sacrifice, and they desired to be co-redeemers in imitation of this, and kind of each formed just one emotion. There was the desire to console God and the desire to obtain mercy from man. And so I think we can see kind of at a first level, both of them, just as an extension of their love of God. It was completely selfless endeavor that they had their unique ways of offering countless little sacrifices in complete trust that mercy would be obtained for sinners in return. And of course, we have St. Therese's little way, and Sister St. Pierre. She had kind of a dizzying regimen of offering sacrifices throughout her day. She would rotate each hour and day and month with a different set of meditations, primarily on, all on Christ's life, but she really did like to focus on his youth, especially. So this was kind of the first level. And then they both, as I say, learned to utilize the Holy Face in the salvation of their brethren. It was really only slowly revealed to Sister St. Pierre that the wounded Holy Face was the essence of the devotion, the way of the devotion. She had been the reason the devotion was needed had been explained to her, but the method kind of came later, and it came, in fact, with her being asked by Christ, shockingly, to take on the sins of France. She was allowed to use Christ's merits and love to pay her assumed debts, so to speak. But she was designated by Christ to do this, and that's where the connection with Joan of Arc comes in. My first chapter is on Joan of Arc, and of course, Saint Joan of Arc saved France through more material means, physical battle, and Sister St. Pierre, another unlikely maiden savior of France, saved France through a spiritual battle. And their life and their death and their prayer was the same. Great God, save France, and he remarkably did. And so that's a really neat thing to delve into. And again, that's in the longer version of the Sister St. Pierre's, or the Life of Sister Mary of St. Peter, which you have, and people, I'm sure, would really enjoy reading that. So anyway, that's how Sister St. Pierre learned to utilize the Holy Face. It was a directive by God, and he revealed this as not only the greatest source of grace second to the sacraments, but really as a power heretofore unknown. You mentioned before, we have always had adoration of the Holy Face and love for the Holy Face, devotion to the Holy Face. And we've always had means of reparation, but to unite those two, and to really utilize the cooperation of man in that was new. And so that's kind of an important point to make, I guess. Saint Therese knew this; she understood, and a lot of her writings reflected this. I remember one poem talked about, she wanted to collect the tears of Christ as precious pearls to use to obtain the salvation of her brethren, more or less. That's a paraphrase. Okay, so that was kind of the second second level of how deep they went. And then finally, they both became victims. They totally assumed Christ's merit. It's kind of like in the spirit of St. Paul. I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. It's just, this total exchange. It kind of like, I'm going to forget the exact verse, but, Christ says, abide in me and I will abide in you, that kind of thing. The law will abide in you. And I think this gives kind of a really noteworthy second meaning to St. Therese's statement that the holy face, the wounded holy face, as depicted in Isaiah 53, was the source of all her piety. Yes, she did use the wounded holy face as a mystical aid in attaining sanctity, which we'll maybe talk about here in a minute. But she meant it really was her sanctity. She took on the sanctity of Christ. And so anyway, there were differences, though. Sister St. Pierre was asked by Christ to be a victim of justice, allowing Christ to mediate in her the unhoused justice of God, the justice that was meant for her brethren. Now, St. Therese, she chose herself as a victim of merciful love, allowing Christ to love in her the love that was refused by her brethren. So she housed the unhoused love of Christ. And so, at first glance, these seem to be very distinct paths. One primarily focused on justice and one primarily focused on mercy. But manifestly, these were one and the same thing. Christ told us that blasphemy wounds his heart more than any other crime. So if divine justice was being outraged by blasphemy as by no other crime, then so was divine love spurned by these same excesses. And after all, reparation is an act of profound love. Again, we can see this in Christ's wounded face. He did this all out of love for us. And Christ tells us in the Revelations that he is prepared to return to the devotee great grace and love, even a kiss, and this is quotes, a kiss which would be the pledge of eternal union. So he recognizes it as acts of love. But still, some might contend, well, St. Therese, the modern thinking is that she totally bypassed justice. And after all, her way is based on mercy, not justice, love and not fear, as the argument would go. And it is true that St. Therese had a real issue with personal merits. She felt they were problematic and, could lead to pride and so forth. And yet she upheld the justice of God. So she placed mercy over man's merits, over some men's understanding of justice, but not God's justice. And in the book, I have a lot more examples, but, I just know there's a couple things she said, like, all our justice is blemished. So I will appear robed before you, meaning God, in your own justice. And she also said it's because God is just that he's merciful. And, she talked about God's justice being robed in love, perhaps more than his other perfections. And, again, her prayers, her poems, her writing, that really could make the case that she saw appeasement of justice as synonymous with consoling God's mercy. And this is because, she did at times blur the offerings of trust to mercy with merits to justice, because she was using the merits of God. She wanted to rely on his merits in attaining sanctity. And yet, that is the way of the Holy Face devotion. Christ's sanctity becomes that of the devotee. In offering Christ's love and merits to the Father, even the divine likeness is stamped upon man's soul. And so, this shouldn't be totally shocking in the context of the Holy Face devotion. And yet, as we were talking about, it's been overlooked since the 1950s. This influence of Sister St. Pierre upon St. Therese, at times verbatim showing up in her prayers and poetry and writings, reflecting the revelations that were given to Sister St. Pierre. And, as you mentioned, the rest of St. Therese's chosen name, does include of the Holy Face, but that's, only just now maybe being talked about a little bit more after almost 70 years of people not talking about it. And, St. Therese always wore a relic of Sister St. Pierre near her heart. She had an image, just like this one of the Veronica Vale relic image that she had in her breviary and also pinned to her bed curtain during her long illness. As I mentioned, the miracles had taken place in her young life. They were just part of the fabric of France, especially anyone associated with the Carmelite monasteries in France. I think you can really make the case that the devotion and the understanding of some of the revelations given to Sister St. Pierre was such a given as to literally go without saying. And so, that's probably why St. Therese doesn't just come out and say, oh, by the way, this is from Sister St. Pierre, it just was understood. And in the book, I go on to explain kind of a confirmation of that in many respects, Sister St. Pierre and St. Therese, they preferred the others' devotion. St. Therese's is known as the Little Flower. She was known for her spiritual childhood and her love for the child Jesus. And yet her favorite devotion to the very end was that to the wounded Holy Face of Christ. This was given as testimony by her sisters in her canonization even. And similarly, conversely, I guess I should say, as Sister St. Pierre, her whole life was centered around making reparation to the wounded Holy Face. That was her life's work. That was everything that she knew. And yet for her, to the very end, her favorite devotion was to the child Jesus. And she always maintained kind of those qualities of, a little soul, and was very much admired by that eventually. And they did also, and I go into the book, I won't go into this, I'll just kind of maybe list them, but they both understood secrets of the Holy Face. And that was a term St. Therese had. They were kind of selfless aids in experiencing God, that a way to learn and hope in Him alone. And yet, in the Carmelite fashion, this always would overflow into the active care of souls and, wanting to help one's brethren. And so in the book, I talk about the wounded Holy Face being like a fulcrum of merciful love. It's a witness to that, even, just at first glance. But, I talk about that in much more depth. Again, it's this great exchange of the Holy Face offering to God in reparation, and then the return of all the graces. That is the greatest grace, second to the sacraments. So talk about that a little bit as a spiritual aid. Spiritual childhood is actually just sort of built in. Was certainly something that St. Therese espoused, and, linking that to the wounded Holy Face. The Holy Face is like the most distinguished feature of Christ's sacred humanity, to bring with one to union to God. And this is talked about with St. Teresa of Avila. She doesn't single out the face, but then, we can draw the connection, especially with they both St. Therese and Sister St. had dark nights of the soul. And I think this was, used in both to help them through that. This Holy Face as an efficacious object of contemplation, and then the return transforming gaze of Christ, it's very powerful. And again, the part of the face having the ability to imprint its likeness upon the soul. That's kind of almost a separate promise from the one we've been talking about, that the image will be imprinted when we make these acts of reparation. Those are all things that they both use to embrace the wounded as mediator and guide in striving toward a truly divine life. It's a true spirituality of co-redemption, of reparation. And, it's very much for those engaged in the seriousness of the age. And then it kind of goes a step further. They both had a special devotion to Mary in terms of divine maternity. And I can talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that leading into, because you brought up obviously Therese, the whole family was signed up in the confraternity. I mean, if you haven't signed up yet out there, they send you back a little screenshot of the entire Martin family, along with some of the oil. But all of them, and the sisters her sisters was the one to introduce her to it, and then she went all in. But yeah, you bring up Our Lady. You brought up the connection before about the La Salette. Lourdes was going on at the time, and remember DuPont's, he couldn't even get up there because there was so much going on in his neck of the woods that he was talking about, but he knew of it. But he said that I think it was La Salette confirmed everything that was going on in his place with what was going on there, because it was like the same message in a sense. But yeah, so you got 2 Our Lady apparitions, then you got this title of Our Lady of the Holy Name that not too many people, pretty much, unless you read these books, you haven't heard of it.
That's right. Yes. Christ, he chose to bestow on Mary the honor of giving this devotion to man. So that is sort of shocking too. We don't often hear about that. And according to him, he did so because it was, quote, fraught with so much necessity and glory for God. And so, again, we have this kind of shocking word, necessary. But again, that he chooses that it is necessary for us to be involved in this type of co-redemption. And there's so much about Mary that I do go into in the book. I do spend time talking about La Salette, Quito, and Fatima. Mm-hmm. I could have talked about all the approved apparitions, but I just had to choose some, I guess. And La Salette was sort of given us in a sense by Mary because Sister St. Pierre had pleaded with her to reveal these messages to someone else because she was afraid that her own bishop would just never approve him because he was dragging his feet so long. And then, of course, Fatima is, like I said, kind of a sister devotion to this in terms of, the request for reparation, the concern for the errors of Russia, and so forth. And I guess these mystical experiences toward the end of Sister St. Pierre's life, they prefigured the graces and mercy for the salvation of the world, which would result from the reparation and would come through the hands of Mary, our mother and mediatrix of grace. And so, we kind of take some of these ideas of co-redemptrix, mediatrix, and mother of man for granted, and they have been in the teaching magisterium of the church for a very long time, but they still have not been declared as fifth dogma. And I talk about that just a little bit in the context of all this. It's kind of, I guess, the thing that I thought was really interesting is that this understanding of Mary in these different titles, and especially of like a total consecration to Mary in the spirit of St. Louis de Montfort, was kind of generally not fully understood at the time. There was devotion, but it just didn't go as deep. It wasn't total. It wasn't this understanding of a total exchange of our merits and virtues for Mary's in return was just not quite there. And yet the mystical experiences of Sister St. Pierre, they really affirmed Montfort's writings, and kind of total reliance upon Mary as a babe to his mother, for she is the treasurer of all graces. And yet they do confirm this true devotion as the preeminent means to grow close to Jesus. It's clear she didn't know of Montfort's writings. They had been mysteriously hidden for about 100 years, and they were just resurfacing in her late life, and they did not receive ecclesiastical approval until after her death. And there's a couple other clues, like she didn't know to use his terminology. She had different ways of expressing the same things. And and she also was kind of concerned initially about if this was on the right path. And I think if she had been aware of Montfort's writing, she would have been consoled by that. And so anyway, these titles of Mary, as co-redemptrix, mediatrix, and advocate for mankind, the confirmation of each is important in designating spiritual weaponry for man to join with Mary in the battle against the synthesis of all heresies or modernism and all that comes with that package deal. Ultimately, no less than a call for all to assist Mary in her defeat of Satan. And, it is logical that Mary should use man in this fight. Per even St. Colby, he talked about we are instruments in crushing Satan by our assisting in the conversion of the world. And, Pope Leo XIII kind of ties into this again. He did write many encyclicals on Mary as mediatrix and the true devotion as outlined by St. Louis de Montfort. And then, as I mentioned, he did compose the St. Michael prayer. And St. Michael, of course, is a patron of this devotion. And he approved the Archconfraternity for the Holy Face devotion, more or less immediately, and for the whole world. He broke with tradition in doing this. And, it wasn't an incremental thing. It was immediately for the whole world. So he seems to have had a deep awareness of the spiritual armament needed, specifically both true devotion to Mary and the Holy Face devotion. Because, man approaches Christ clothed in the merits and love of Mary, and in exchange giving his own to her in total consecration. And then man approaches God the Father clothed in Christ's merits and virtues, as requested in the Holy Face devotion, begging mercy on the part of the brethren. And then, it's kind of neat that Leo XIII described grace flowing in the opposite direction. He wasn't making these connections per se, but he talks about grace flowing from God the Father to Christ, to Mary, to man. And yet man still, he has to initiate the process. And it's part of the mysterious solidarity of, the mystical body of Christ. And we do have a real obligation to assist in the salvation of the multitudes, as was also made clear in Fatima. It's still kind of shocking to hear those words that there are souls that are going to hell because no one is making reparation for them. No one is praying for them. And we hear the same thing in the Holy Devotion as well. And yet, when we do this, when we fulfill our obligation, the rewards are truly biblical. I mean, it's no less than assisting Our Lady in crushing Satan by restoring life and light to the masses and destroying heresies through the conversion of all. And so this is why I had to tack on to the title, I had Reparation to the Holy Face, Mother of all devotions. Yes, it's the pinnacle devotion per the words of Christ himself, but also, Mary as Mother of Grace. It's her role is goal in all devotions, yet it was most clearly defined and honored in the Holy Face devotion. And this provides for all of us. I think we can feel like just in it's hope, a means for man to assist and retain all for Christ. It's a battle plan to assist Our Lady in the current spiritual war against evil. And yet, as I mentioned, capping the key understanding of great Carmelite mystics, especially Saint Therese, and true to Mary, and even the promises in relation surrounding the devotion itself, it is a most valuable aid in man's own individual salvation as well. It is a deep spirituality. And, I did quote Pius IX that it was the devotion destined to save society. And I think this, in part, is what Christ explained in the devotions, that Satan would do everything in his power to stamp it out. And, maybe this is the reason that for those 70 years, maybe in conjunction with the vision that Leo the 13th had, that so few knew about the devotion, that really did drop into obscurity. And, Christ also revealed shockingly that Satan, he delegates the categories of other sins to other demons, but he keeps those of blasphemy to himself. It's his flock of predilection. And then he says, man, therefore, I'm paraphrasing, but he does use this term, by way of the devotion, is to become a terror to hell. And so I think, that's a real call for us to rise to the challenge, because God himself has given us the means to do so.
Oh, fantastic. Again, everyone, the book is at Sophia Press. There it is right there. Unveiling the Sixth Station of the Cross. They'll be linked underneath in the show notes. If you hit the drop-down box, if you know the drill, you know the drill. So there's more, click more, boom, and it'll be linked up right there. Anything else that you think that we haven't covered that you want to throw out there? I mean, you've touched on mostly almost every chapter, but I forget. I'm glad you brought up Joan, because I totally forgot that you opened up the book with Jonah. When I started reading, I'm going, that's an interesting thing. I did not expect to start with Joan.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
so
I guess the death of legacy.
Oh, right. That is something. Oh no, I can't believe I don't have it here. We had a tornado warning, so I had to remove some of the things that I was going to show you. I have an original circular of Sister St. Pierre that was just a long obituary that the Carmelites would put out when a nun passed away. And so it is a very long obituary. It talks about Sister St. Pierre's virtues and her death. It does not go as much into the revelations, I think, because they already realized at that time that they would probably be put a book about the revelations. But anyway, a dear person in Canada translated that very long circular for me, and it's an appendix in the back of the book. And it's extra interesting, I think, because I have never seen it, and I don't think that, except for those, say, 50 convents or so that were given a circular at the time of her death, I don't think it has ever been. One was sent to my great-great-grandfather as her surviving brother, and that's how I had it. And I never knew we had it until my mother passed away. I was going through some of the things, and I thought, wow, amazing. And so that was one thing I was going to show, just as a kind of fun thing. That the book itself, we could talk for hours.
Oh yeah,
Things, but yeah, talk about communism in depth, and use a lot of von Sheen quotes. And we talk about how this devotion relates to emotions, and as I mentioned, some of the Marian apparitions, details of Sister St. Pierre's life and mystical experiences. But I do have this is one thing that was sent to my great-great-grandfather, and it is from Tours, and it's it has been touched to the Veronica Vale image that was used by DuPont. So that's fun. And there are some of those around, but this one was from Tours, the Carmel of Tours. And then another thing that was from Carmel of Tours is this is a picture of the chapel at Tours at the Carmel. And so I don't know if anybody would have seen that maybe too much. I probably should have included a picture of that in the book. And then there were some letters. I I do wish I could read French, because this one came from tour to my great-great-grandfather, and only it came by way of the priest of his parish. And so I think they were trying to track him down, and I don't know what occasion was. And so maybe someone can translate that for me eventually. There's also a number of letters from Sister St. Pierre's father, who he really revered and thought that he was like another St. Joseph. And there are letters from him to my great-great-grandfather, and about all I can make out is my dear son. And there's multiple ones of those. And the reason that I don't have any letters from Sister St. Pierre, evidently, I'm not even sure what she was allowed to write, but I have some letters from the Carmel in New Orleans asking my great-great-grandfather for of Sister Pierre and souvenirs and memories of her, because they wanted to start her cause for canonization. And I know that they did. My great-great-grandfather did this. There are other letters that they thank him, and then it's kind of agonizing, because like some books that I think may have been inscribed to my great-great-grandfather, Prosper was his name, by Sister St. Pierre, because the page has been cut out, the first page, and so I don't know, what was sent to him. And then finally, now I may have to send a picture of this to you, so that you could have, it's on my website, but this, a relic of Sister St. Pierre's and clothing. And, you can see the M and the P major, and, the solid parts are the clothing, her habit, and then all those tiny parts are her hair. And so, and also I won't it out because it is somewhat crumbling, but it's a piece of her original coffin. And the reason that she had this available is because she was originally buried at the Carmel tour, and then eventually, when the Oratory of the Holy Face was established, she was moved to be buried next to DuPont. And here's a little tag indicating that it is from her coffin. And I need to enlarge that and put it on my website too. But I just thought that it'd be fun to show some of those little things. And, it could go on, but I guess this is a good place to stop for now.
Yeah, I got your website up. It's, is it theholyfacedevotion.org?
Yes, that's right.
So there, it will be linked in the show notes as well. She has quite a few things on the site. And again, the unveiling of the sixth station of the cross. Mary Jane, thank you for your time. And yes, we could go on for hours. It would be easy to do. And I hear that somebody's been trying to text you up for the last 30 minutes. So hopefully they're not calling the cops.
I left the phone on because I knew one wanted to show, and definitely should have turned it off. But I thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, I really appreciated the invitation.